Thank you for joining us today. When we think of behavioral assessments, most of us immediately think of them for pre-hire selection. While they are great for that application, assessments produce a wealth of information that can add value well beyond that single use case. Over the next 45 minutes, you will learn tips to leverage behavioral assessment data over the entire employee lifecycle. This session will illustrate ways you can use this valuable data to personalize and improve processes like onboarding, building effective, well-balanced teams, promotion and succession planning, career pathing and mentoring, as well as coaching and development. Here, I'm really excited to have Dr. Jody Bradham, who is the Executive Director of Consulting Services here at TalentQuest, speak with us today. He's a licensed psychologist and executive consultant with 26 years of experience in the people, change, and growth business. He's been at TalentQuest for about 10 years and has worked with many organizations to help develop talent strategies, as well as in various coaching and leadership development capacities. So I'm really excited to have Jody speak with us today, and I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Jane, for that introduction. That sounds wonderful. I wish I could live up to that on a day-to-day basis, but we'll see how it goes. But no, thank you for the introduction. Yeah, 20 plus years as a psychologist, and coming up now close to 30 years in the people business in one form or another. And a lot of that time has been spent doing different things, teaching, consulting, coaching, as Jane mentioned. But along the way, I've done an awful lot of assessments, and I'm happy to be with you all today to talk about the TalentQuest assessment. But I'm very grateful for you taking time out of your busy day to spend some time with me. And of course, my hope is that you'll feel like it's time well spent. It will go quickly, but our focus today is around the TalentQuest assessment. And I want to spend a little bit of time just talking about some different ways that you can leverage the data from the assessment over and above helping you to make decisions around hiring. And as Jane mentioned, as we go through, my goal is that this is useful for you. So as we go through, if there are questions that you have or comments that you want to share with the rest of the group here, by all means, feel free to do so. But without further ado, I want to tee us up with just a poll question, just to get the conversation going a little bit here. So the ask of each of you is to think about a childhood friend that you grew up with. And because you grew up with this friend, you knew them really well, I'm assuming. Now, here's the question. Because you knew this person so well, how confident would you be in answering or predicting what this individual would like or not like, or how this individual would respond in certain situations, or what kinds of activities they would enjoy participating in? So just reflect on that a little bit, and Jane's going to pop up the options there for you to choose from. Make your choice when you're ready. So I'm going to submit.
Give it just a couple more minutes here, Jody, and I'll end the poll. Share some results. Are you seeing the results on your side?
Yep. Okay. This is very interesting. And of course, as time changes in those relationships, then our confidence probably changes as well. But to segue here, let's take a look at those results, or pop those back up if you would, Jane.
Yep.
So let's take a look at those results. In 50% say highly confident, 36 somewhat confident. And so 86 plus 7, what's that, 93% somewhat confident or better, which is fascinating to see, but I got to tell you, it's not at all surprising. And it reminds me of kind of an anecdote. When I was young in my career as a psychologist, I would frequently be called to one of our local hospitals to conduct assessments on youngsters who, for obvious reasons, just weren't feeling great. And I remember, as if it were yesterday, one of these youngsters, preteen, just stopped in the middle of our interaction and said, hey, why are you asking me to do all these tests? What's that about? He was very direct and kind of caught me off guard, to be honest with you, but I appreciated the candor there. And my answer to him was, look, I want to know you as if we grew up together. You're 10 years old or whatever it was, and I don't have the benefit of going back in time and actually growing up with you. So these assessments are my cheat, my workaround. It's a way for me to get to know you as if we grew up together. And the more I know you, the more I can understand you. And the more I can understand you, the better partner I can be for you. And that seemed to meet his curiosity as it relates to that. But what's important to understand with these assessments is the degree to which you can leverage assessments like these to truly understand somebody. It's a gift they're giving you, but it's also tremendous power that you have to be the kind of partner that you want to be for them, which in turn helps them to be a better partner for the organization. So this assessment in particular, when used properly, is a great way to understand someone almost as if you grew up with them. And with that gift and knowledge, you can certainly do lots of different things besides simply say, do we want to bring them on board or not? And specifically, as we talk about the rest of our time together, we're going to go through some examples of how you can use the assessment in onboarding them once you've made your decision, building strong functioning teams, coaching and growing folks, and then looking into the future with them as they have aspirations and desires, and the organization has needs going forward. How can we use the assessment to support those objectives? So hopefully some of these will resonate with you, and some will kind of pique your interest. But with that being said, we'll just kind of jump right in. And we'll start with the onboarding as the first one. So when it comes to onboarding, at the end of the day, the primary objective in effective onboarding is getting the new hire up to speed as quickly as possible to get that return on investment for the organization, but also to ensure that the individual's having the most positive experience possible. And we know from experience and research and data that there are really two primary elements that drive that. And one of those is the degree of assimilation or relationships that can be established in an organization. Certainly the more the better, and certainly the sooner the better. And the other is the degree to which we can help folks be job ready, meaning helping them to understand everything they need to understand in order to do the very things we've hired them to do. And the TalentQuest assessment is a great tool to help with both of those, especially if you use the assessment as part of that hiring process. For example, the screenshots that you see in the upper right corner and the lower left, these are samples of talent insights. So for those of you that have that turned on in the system, it's pulling from the assessment data to help managers understand how to engage with the employee, how to manage the employee. But even beyond that, there's information in the assessment that can allow the manager to better understand how might this person learn? What's going to be the best way for me to support their networking internally? How fast or slow do I need to be in presenting them new projects, new tasks, new learning? And when I present those, what's the best way to do that? Should I present them and then walk through them side by side, or should I allow this person to chew on it for a little bit and then come back after the fact? You kind of get my point with that. The benefit of understanding an individual and from a personality standpoint is you understand how to tap into their strengths, and you also know how to work around and mitigate any gaps that may be there right out of the gate. And the degree to which you engage in that with that kind of intent, you're also feeding the relationship between the manager and the employee without even being intentional about doing so. So when we think about the onboarding piece, that's a great example of using the personality assessment. But then if we take it one step further, we also know that the relationship between employees and their managers is a critical driver of employee retention and engagement. So we can leverage the personality data from both parties, much like we would on a dating site, to be a bit crass, perhaps. How can we help the individual understand the manager from a personality standpoint as best we can? And vice versa, more obviously, how can we help the manager understand the direct report? So for example, if we look at the two samples you see on the screen here, this direct report is a smart individual, but is also one who can be a bit guarded, maybe a little bit more reserved, a little bit shyer or slower to engage socially, and maybe a little bit more independent, needing less supervision or less oversight from the manager. Well, conversely, if we look at the manager, this is one who's very much a people person, very team-oriented, kind of what you see is what you get, a walking open book, as it were, but one who also operates with a bit of intensity and energy and drive. So if this manager is not careful, in spite of any best efforts, this manager could easily overwhelm the direct report as part of the onboarding process, thus setting up a potentially conflictual relationship, or at least putting some speed bumps in that road that won't be necessary. So just using that as an example, it's a great way for us to understand one another so we know how to best partner with one another. And of course, the manager and direct report relationship being one of the primary ones. Now, as we think about relationships, kind of using that as a bit of a transition here, especially these days, very few folks are coming into an organization strictly as an individual contributor. Even if you're not coming in with any supervisory or management responsibilities, you are almost always coming in with an expectation that you will be part of a team or at least a working group. So scaling up the personality data, the degree to which we can help teams understand one another, both their strengths and their gaps, as well as just their natural tendencies. It's a precursor in many ways for helping the team to operate more effectively and cohesively going forward. We know that high levels of professional and personal trust are foundational and somewhat predictive of high functioning teams. Well, where does trust come from other than more self-awareness and awareness of others? And of course, when done so in an appropriate way, an appropriate setting. So in addition to that, the screenshots that you see are examples of team insights that pulls the assessment data forward. So in the previous slide, we saw talent insights, where a manager can better understand how to engage with the individual, for example. These team insights give managers and others insight into particular styles or profiles or tendencies that may dominate on a team. So for example, the screen, the image in the upper right here, spontaneous versus procedural, you see that to a large degree, this is a pretty spontaneous team. So if a manager or an organization is looking to bring a lot of structure or rigor or discipline or red tape, as some may say, this manager can expect there's going to be some ruffled feathers with this team. So how useful would that be in either determining, do we want to go that route, and or how might we manage the team if we are going to go that route, just for example. So the objective, of course, is with regard to teams, it is a collective of individuals, but the degree to which we can get that 2 + 2 = 5 dynamic going, the better for the organization. And the degree to which we can help folks understand one another, we're halfway through that battle. Now, I'm going fairly quickly here. Feel free to stop me at any point along the way. But the coaching and the development, this is a place where we see the assessment providing just a tremendous amount of rich value. And for many organizations, it seems they will use the assessment as part of the hiring process, and then it proverbially sits on the shelf. And yet we've got opportunities when we see somebody who is a high potential, or somebody that we know we want to keep and grow and have with us for years to come, who we may be missing opportunity to best support them if we don't access that data. So when I think about coaching and development, whether it's for just performance enhancement and helping high flyers continue to fly high, or whether it's from a perspective of remediation or repair or stopping the bleeding, as I'll say in some cases, it's the same philosophy. How do we help somebody go from where they are to where they want to be? Well, part of any journey is understanding where you're starting from. And the personality data that can be garnered from the assessment is a great tool to do that. Based on an individual's scores on the assessment, we get a great feel for some of their natural tendencies, preferences, behavioral characteristics, and from that we can better understand why they may be tripping on their own toes sometimes, but we can also better understand where they are relative to what's needed from them going forward. So for example, if you look at the individual contributor on the right, this individual is targeted for a move into a management position. The scores would suggest this is a people-oriented guy or gal. They seem very interested in connecting with others, engaging with others. Socially, they're very bold, outgoing. They bring a high level of optimism and energy. They tend to be pretty open, transparent, but not overly so. So good boundaries there. They like to be collaborative and part of a team, part of something bigger than themselves. And generally, they're very laid back, patient, tolerant folks. All wonderful things. However, we also see that they can be a bit understated, maybe not always as assertive as they could be. And we can see from a profile like this that this may also be an individual who might not be very comfortable giving difficult feedback, having those difficult conversations, or holding people accountable for certain performance expectations. So how helpful would that be to know before we move them into a position of managing others, rather than waiting for them to feel frustrated, discouraged, or their team? Why don't we understand where somebody's starting and then help them build the strengths, i.e. those relational skills are going to take them a long way. Now, if we can help them round out some of that tough-mindedness, for example, they're teed up for success even further, okay? Now, conversely, if you look at the profile on the left, I imagine some of you have had this scenario. You've got managers where the team turnover is a bit higher than desired. And of course, the manager is all well-intended and certainly doing the best he or she can do. There's no ill motives behind this, but when we pull out the personality profile, we get a little bit of insight as to why that turnover may be happening. This person, much like the individual contributor, very people-oriented person, outgoing, friendly, likable, seems to really care about others, seems to really enjoy engaging with others. So again, from an interpersonal standpoint, it all seems well. However, we also see that this person can be very rigid, very black and white, maybe overly demanding of the team, and maybe operating with a high level of intensity around doing things kind of the right way, quote unquote, right? Not a lot of flexibility in there. And you can imagine that being on that team might be a little bit frustrating, right? So if we can help a manager better understand, look, these might be some of your natural characteristics, and when used properly, can and have served you well, but when overplayed or when used without purpose, can work against you. And perhaps that's what's going on here. Let's take a look at that and see if we can think about some ways to experiment doing things differently and see if we get different results. And all of that simply comes from looking at what a person is starting with relative to the journey you or they want to pursue. And so it's a great way to just kind of help folks understand they are who they are no matter where they go. Their job, our job, my job is to understand that as best we can and make the best of what we bring. And so the degree to which we can raise some awareness around that, all the better.
Jody, I got an interesting comment from Jeff in the chat. He says he's planning on using the assessment as part of a coaching or interaction class where all participants take the assessment and then use it to prepare for role plays. They then have access to those results when they go back to do their jobs. Have you got any recommendations for Jeff on, you know, how he might be able to additionally use that information, or what kind of information maybe he should provide to the employees when he sends those results back with them?
Well, the first one right out of the gate is with all assessments, it's very important that folks are trained and understand what the results are really telling them, as well as what the results aren't telling them. So one of the first recommendations would be to make sure we cover those bases first, so that there's no or less risk of the data being misused, misinterpreted, and inadvertently creating some bad blood, as there were. But I love the idea, and that's a great example of what we're talking about as it relates to helping folks using what we know about folks so that we can engage more effectively with them. In this case, a training case, how can I use what I know about this individual in order to engage in a more useful role play for them, right? And if I'm following at all, I could use what I know about this individual contributor, for example, to engage in role plays with this individual, perhaps in a more direct way, come with a bit of a chip on my shoulder, bring a little bit of attitude, so I can help this individual develop those skills and learn to be a little more comfortable. So I think it's a great idea and a great premise. The only caveat, and the primary caveat, is this, just to make sure, as with all assessments, we're using it for what it's intended and not beyond, and everybody is clear on what it's telling you and what it's not.
Right. Yeah, he did chime in to say that it's to prep the managers for using the TQ assessment in coaching their own employees. So it sounds like a really great use case.
Yeah, that is a great use case, and that's also an example of some of the talent insights that get generated in the system too. It will give you feedback like that, you know, Susie responds best by speaking directly, not beating around the bush, get to the point. You know, Billy, on the other hand, takes some time in the setup and then gradually introduce bad news, for example. Yeah, that's great. Well, in that spirit, let me just pause. Any other thoughts or questions?
I haven't seen anything else come in, Jody, so okay. I would say continue.
Okay, very good. So the last little part here is career pathing and succession planning. And so for some of you may be saying, well, this is the same thing as using it for hiring, is it? I can appreciate the thinking there, but what I'm going for here is kind of in a continuation of coaching and development. When we have folks in the organization that have desires to grow beyond their current role, they're often going to be wondering, what else can I do? Where else can I go? What are my opportunities and the like? Well, likewise, the organization is going to have needs going forward too. So how do we understand what those needs are, and what do we need to be looking for relative to what it takes to fill those needs? And what you see on the screen here is just an example. This is a fleet manager job description, or part of it, that I pulled off of Indeed. So it's a legit role. But when you look at the descriptors there, you can easily extrapolate some personality characteristics that you would say you would be looking for somebody who likely would be effective in that role. So think about in your organization, if you were somebody working with somebody on your team, and I say, you know what, I think this whole fleet manager job would be a great fit for me. What are your thoughts? Can we talk about that? How can you help me get there? Well, step one is understanding, well, what's required for effectiveness in that position. And now that we understand that, we need somebody assertive, fair-minded, highly organized, and the like. Now that we understand that, we can then map that back to the personality assessment data for the individual. To what degree does this individual have those characteristics? And if they don't have those characteristics in and of themselves, that's not a deal breaker, but what would be required or what would need to be involved in order to help them close the gaps in that area, right? And what an interesting conversation that would be as it relates to, well, I'm not sure that you're equipped now for that position, but let's talk about the incremental steps that may be helpful in taking you from where you are to that position. And that conversation alone, again, we know from experience and we know from research, that conversation alone is a tremendous catalyst for increasing engagement scores and commitment to the organization from the employee, not to mention any follow-up that comes from that conversation. Now, the other interesting thing from the TQ assessment data is if you look at the images on the left and right of the profile, if we've got profiles in the system, benchmark profiles relative to a certain role, you can score an individual up against multiple roles at the same time and get a feel for the degree to which their natural personality characteristics are most similar with effective folks in these other kinds of roles, right? The higher the number on a scale of 0 to 100, the more similar. So you see this individual on the left scored 100 for VP of sales, but an 85 for credit analyst. Well, why might that be such a difference? Well, if I look at this individual's profile, which is not the one in the middle, but if I look at that individual's profile, it probably tells me a little bit more about some of their interpersonal orientation, some of their thinking style, and the like, right? So from an organizational standpoint, if I really know that I've got some needs that are going to be coming down the pike, and I would prefer to build rather than buy as it relates to backfilling those needs, let's look throughout the organization and see who might naturally be the best fit for those positions. And then again, what an interesting conversation that might be to go back to Susie or Billy and say, look, we're going to be having an opening in this particular role in the next couple of years. You seem like you would be a great fit for it. Can we talk about what that might look like and if you'd be interested? Again, what a tremendous conversation to have. And then the image on the right is simply a way that we can then take those personality characteristics and map them to competencies that you may already have in place in the organization, right? If you already know what it takes to be highly effective in your organization, then we can look to pull that personality data into that equation and see to what degree there is some association. So in the example on the right, this profile probably does not suggest this individual is going to be real strong at broad thinking, or they may not be as adept or flexible with change, but they do seem to be naturally oriented towards collaboration and working as part of a team, right? And so you think about scaling that through the rest of the competencies in your models, how useful it would be to pull that data in. Now, we've gone fast and furious and really just provided a few examples. But my hope at the beginning was twofold. One, that this is useful for you in some way, but more importantly, that it at least stirs your curiosity to be willing to try it on in different settings and to walk around with it and to see how comfortable and effective it is for you. So with that, Jen, you want to pull the last poll question up? I really do. I'm interested to hear from you. Based on what we've talked about today, which of these would you consider to be low-hanging fruit? If you're not already using it for these things, what would be low-hanging fruit as it relates to being kind of an easy place to begin to try it and experiment with it and see if it gives you any value? Just kind of
as I hear you go through the career pathing and succession, Jody, what a great motivator for an existing employee to be tapped and say, you really do reflect the values and the traits and behaviors that we want in our leaders, and to develop those people for future roles. Nice way to retain.
Absolutely. We know that folks enjoy having those conversations. And even if the end of that conversation results in something like, well, I'm not sure we can do that for you, having that conversation is a great way to keep that motivation and engagement going.
Yeah.
All right, look at the coaching and development there, 50%. Well, let's just kind of ride that. Keep that up there, Jane, if you would. And I'm going to ask you guys to chime in through the chat or Q&A or whatever. But those that said coaching and development, are you already using it for coaching and development or no?
Yeah, type your answer in the chat feature, and we can get a sense. Quiet crowd out there, Jody.
Right. What are we seeing there?
We're not seeing much. Oh, here we go.
Okay.
I got a no from Alan.
Okay, all right, very good.
Very limited. From Jeff, he said specific managers, but not broadly.
Okay, very good. So let's I want to pause on this one real quick, just because there's such opportunity there. And I love that 50% are saying this would be low hanging fruit. And it really is. With the onboarding, with the team dynamics, the career pathing, you could make the case that a little more sophistication in using the assessment would be more helpful before you roll that out. And I certainly would support that. The coaching and development, not that you can willy-nilly that, but that can start with just a simple conversation. And I think it was Jeff, the guy from Greenville, is a great example. Think about not only coaching, using the assessment data to coach a manager or to coach an individual performer, but think about how we might be able to use the assessment to coach a manager to coach their person, right? How can we help the manager to be a better coach? Pulling that data in is simply a matter of, let's sit down and help you to see what you're bringing to the equation. And then from that, let's look at your team and see who's going to resonate with that more than others. What adjustments might you need to make? Let's see what that looks like. Now, go give it a shot with one or two of the folks on your team. Come back and let's see how it went. It can be just there's a low point of entry when we're trying to help folks be the best version of themselves, right? There's no ulterior motive here other than we want you to be the best you can be. And let's sit down together. Let me share with you what I know about you, and I want to hear from you about what you know about you. And let's put those things together so that you can be most effective in your efforts. And that's just a lot of fun to do, and folks seem to value that. All right, well, one more slide here, and then I'll hush up and take whatever questions. But I said at the beginning, I believe this to be true, and I underscore and emphasize and put exclamation points on all those things. The TalentQuest assessment provides a rich feel for an individual. I presented it as if it would let you know somebody as if you grew up together. It won't quite do that, but it does give you a tremendous amount of data to help you understand somebody. And because of that, it's important you take it seriously and not misuse any of that stuff, but honor it for the gift that it is for both the individual and for the organization. And we don't advocate, we don't encourage, we don't support using the assessment as a decision-making tool. It's one of the tools, it's an aid, and it's a tremendous resource, but we never encourage you using it just as a standalone. And of course, we are always encouraging training around the use of the tool, not only so that you can make sure you're using it effectively, but so that you can get the most out of it in all kinds of different capacities, the ones we mentioned on the call today being some of those. So with those caveats and cautions, I will hush and thank you again for the time. Again, I hope this was useful for you, or at least informative, or maybe even stirring the pot in your thinking a little bit. But I'm open to any questions or comments or even challenges.
Or just another comment that was made by Jeff to say that he's been using a DDI course called Engaging and Retaining Talent. And so his plan is to have the managers take the assessment, come to the class, look at each other's assessments in pairs to practice the retention conversations, which is another great use case.
That is a great use case. And is Jeff, are you the guy from Greenville?
Yep, I think he is. Yep.
Okay, so I knew there was something I liked about Jeff. So just to build on that, as an example, one of the things that we have done in different leadership training courses, especially with an intact leadership team, is we will pull a team together and look at their profiles. And I showed some screenshots from the team insights, but if we've got a large team in the same room and we're showing individual results, let's take the easygoing versus restless, that last scale on the TalentQuest assessment. And I've asked folks to line up across the room, depending on where your score is on that particular scale. And depending on how many folks we've got in the room, it can be quite informative and fun to not only help folks know, okay, well, no wonder you're always barking on my phone. You're a pretty intense guy. And no wonder it takes me 3 times to get an email back from you. You're a pretty laid back guy, for example. But what's more interesting is that when we see that represented across the room, we get a real feel for what's predominant in the culture. If half of the leaders in the team are on that restless, intense side, boy, that says a lot about the culture we're in. Now, we can decide if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but how informative is that, right? So I love, Jeff, I love your idea. I love your plan. And it's a great way to use that data.
So Karen asked a question, and I'm gonna expand on her question, because I know I've probably asked you this before, and I think about it a lot. So she asked, how often should we refresh team members' assessments? How often should they repeat taking the assessment? So and to expand on that, I say, do people's personalities change over time? So does it make sense to change it? And do you typically see a big change over time?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question on so many levels. So the short answer is that as we get older, our personalities tend to change less. If anything, we get more entrenched in our personality. So whereas I used to be more flexible, my wife may tell you I'm nowhere near as flexible as I used to be, quite rigid in some cases. But no, in all seriousness, our personalities really don't change that much. What we will see frequently, well, not frequently, what we will see more often than not on the TalentQuest assessment is where there are changes. I describe them as being changes in degree rather than in direction. So if we go back up to the scale there, let me just use this one. You see our assessment is scored on a bipolar scale, left and right. If somebody's coming across like this individual, self-confident, very self-confident, and they take the assessment a couple years later, it's highly unlikely that now they're going to be on this side of the spectrum. But what we might expect is that they temper that a little bit over the years as they get a little more mature, and maybe as they get beat up a little bit in the world, maybe they bring a little more humility with them, and so they'll dial that down a little bit. So our personalities will shift a little bit over time, but frequently it's going to be in degree rather than in direction. Now, in terms of the question of how frequently should we refresh these assessments, it's a fairly straightforward question, but in a typical fashion, I'll say it depends. From a shelf life standpoint, we recommend anywhere from 3 to 5 years is a good time to just kind of refresh and renew. In that time, if there's been any significant life changes, or certainly there's still opportunity for more maturation to happen, we would certainly capture that in that time frame. There's no real need to do it any more frequently than that. And of course, if you go outside that 5-year range, then certainly we would recommend it. But that sweet spot seems to be 3 to 5 years. Now, what influences that as well is if the business is changing, the industry is changing, your culture is changing, and or if you want any of those to change, that can be another good opportunity to step back and say, well, when's the last time we took a good look at our folks, right? And let's go and update those if we need to. Because, for example, from a culture standpoint, if we've got a culture of introverts and we're trying to build a team that's just the old Apple, Google environments where it's playrooms all the time and bean bags and open environments, and that's the culture we're going for, it would help us to know if we're even close to beginning with that before we start to drive that. So I say 3 to 5 years typically.
And I'm going to add on that even again, Jody. So, the events of the last year may have been significant in a lot of people's lives. Would it make sense to almost kind of interesting research to see if anything has changed in the last 18 months with regard to assessments and behaviors? Any comments on that?
Well, from an individual standpoint, I would still say you're going to see changes in degree, not direction, although the nature of the past year could certainly influence that degree shift. Right. But from an organizational standpoint, as the organization is reflecting on the past year and thinking about any adjustments they may need to make going forward, absolutely, that could be very informative.
Right. Another question that did come in, it said, you mentioned we provide training on the assessments. Are you able to expand on that any further?
Yeah, we offer a certification training for those who are interested in using the assessment. And it walks you through not only how to interpret it, but we get into the origin of the assessment, how it's built, kind of the nuts and bolts behind it, as well as give some time to practice interpretation, feedback, using it for making decisions, using it for some of these coaching conversations and the like.
TalentQuest has deep roots in behavioral science and has designed a SaaS talent management platform that puts people at the center of every process. TalentQuest's modular capabilities will help you hire, manage, develop, and retain the best and brightest, and our strengths in leadership development and coaching, as well as our exceptional support, will ensure you are successful. Thank you for attending. You can learn more at www.talentquest.com, or you can contact us at lets-talk@talentquest.com.